you're pulling back on the bowstring and the horse beneath you is already moving to the next target. You haven't slept under your roof in 4 days. This is the life of a Mongol horse archer under Genghis Khan, where the saddle isn't only your fighting position, it's your bed, your kitchen table, and most of what you'll call home for months at a time. What you're about to experience is one of the most physically punishing military lives ever recorded. And the reason an army the size of a mid-sized city conquered more land than Rome ever held. By the end of this, you'll understand why that happened, and you'll see the one thing these warriors actually carried that made all of it possible. So subscribe if you're new, and let's get into it. Riding west with Genghis Khan's army into the Khwarezmian Empire. The sun isn't even up yet, but you're already awake, because you never really stopped moving. You dozed last night in the saddle, body swaying with the horse's walk. Mind half unconscious, a thing step riders learn young, and something European travelers wrote about with disbelief. Because what do you mean you're sleeping while riding your horse? Anyway, you've been on horseback since you were 3 or 4 years old. Your legs are wrapped around the barrel of a stocky, shaggy horse. This isn't the tall war stallion you're picturing, but something closer to a large pony, 12 to 14 hands at the shoulder. This animal survives on grass it digs out of the snow with its own hooves, goes unshod, and asks for almost nothing. You own 5 of them. Every Mongol warrior rides with a string of remounts, rotating through them so no single horse breaks down. That string is why your army covers 60 miles in a day, while an enemy on one horse manages 20. But if you're always moving, how do you eat? Well, first you reach into a leather pouch at your hip and pull out a piece of dried meat. Hard as kindling. This is Bortz. And almost everything you've heard about it is slightly wrong. It isn't salted, it isn't dry in the sun. The beef, horse, camel, or sometimes mutton is cut into thick strips. Every trace of fat stripped away, because fat goes rancid instead of drying. Then it's hung in the shade under the roof of a ger, where cold dry air does the work over about a month until it turns brown and wooden. No salt, no smoke, no fire. Congrats! You just reduced a whole cow down to something you can carry in a bag. Ground to powder, a fistful dropped into hot water becomes soup. Right now you're just tearing a piece off with your teeth and letting it soften as you ride. The horse's rhythm becomes the rhythm of your chewing. Now, there's a ridiculous story that Mongol riders kept a slab of raw meat under the saddle, and the heat and the pounding tenderized it into what became steak tartare. I know this might sound crazy, but it's not true, because it's the most repeated Mongol food claim on the internet, and, well, it makes about no sense. A 13th century French chronicler named... Hold on. Before I mess this up, I am not French. I can barely speak my first language. Jean de Gentilly. Okay, yep, wrap it up. Anyway, he did write that these riders put raw meat between the saddle and the horse cloth. That part is in the record. But Gentilly never went west. Sorry, he never went east. He was writing down secondhand accounts, and historians going back at least a century have pointed out a far likelier explanation. Meat packed under a saddle is a poultice. It's for the horse's sore back, not the rider's dinner. As for steak tartare, that's a 19th century European restaurant dish. The Mongol origin story was attached to it afterward, and it stuck because it sounds incredible. The detail about horse sweat curing the meat with salt is pure invention. It doesn't work that way, and no medieval source says it. Alright, still with me? Because the next one is stranger, and this one holds up a bit better. When you're desperate and on a campaign covering thousands of miles, you get desperate. Whoa! Let me lock in. You open a vein in your horse's neck. Take a small amount of blood, close the cut, and drink it. Marco Polo described exactly this, and European readers assumed he was embellishing. He probably wasn't. Modern historians argue about the routine it really was. The calories don't add up to a diet, and it costs the horse something. So take it for what it almost certainly was, an emergency measure that bought a rider one more day without stopping. You're moving in a unit of 10 men called a R-band. These 10 are bonded tighter than family because Mongol law makes them collectively responsible. If one man breaks and runs, the whole R-band can be executed. 10 R-bands make a zun of 100. 10 zuns make a mingun of 1,000. 10 minguns make a tumen. 10,000 riders. It's a decimal system borrowed from earlier steppe peoples, but Genghis Khan enforced it in a way nobody before him managed. And critically, he mixed the tribes inside every unit. Your loyalty runs to the 9 men beside you and the Khan above you, not to your clan. The army invading Khwarezmia numbers somewhere between 75 and 150,000 men. Historians still argue the figure, and they are not all archers. Roughly 6 in 10 are light horse archers, like you. The other 4 are heavy cavalry, lances, and lamellar armor. Behind them come engineers, siege crews, auxiliaries, and conscripted labor. Genghis has split this force into separate columns, advancing hundreds of miles apart, converging on one empire from directions its ruler cannot cover at once. And you're 12 hours from contact. Here's what makes you just the goat. You don't stop moving to shoot. You trick shot on horseback. The bow on your back is composite recurve wooden core, horn on the belly, sinew on the back, bound with animal glue. Curving backward when unstrung. You're carrying 2 or 3 of them and around 60 arrows, split between light ones for distance and heavy ones for punching through armor. There's a file in your quiver for sharpening the heads, and those heads were quenched in brine when they were forged, specifically so they'd bite into armor. The bow will throw an arrow 300 meters, and there are records of much further. But throwing an arrow and killing a man are different problems. You do real work inside 100 to 150 meters, and if you want to actually defeat armor, closer than that. You release in the beat when all 4 of the horse's hooves are off the ground. No impact, no bounce. You've been drilling that since you could hold a bow. Watch what happens. The target appears, a column of enemy cavalry, heavier than yours. Certain their weight will crush you. You don't charge. Your unit wheels and rides parallel to their unit, just outside lance reach. And as you pass, you twist backwards in the saddle, draw, release. That backward shot has a name. The Parthian shot. Borrowed from horsemen who were doing it 1,000 years before you were born. They chase. That's the trap. You retreat at a pace you control, and every rider in your mingun is shooting backward over his horse's rump. It looks like a rout. It's a drill. Arrows keep falling and they can't close because your horses are fresher and you decide the speed. Then the signal comes. A whistling arrow, cutting overhead with a sound you can pick out of a battle. The entire unit pivots. The retreat was a feint. Now you're charging a line that's already strung out and coming apart. You don't carry a heavy lance. You have a saber, an axe, and a horsehair lasso. You ride the gaps and you're gone before they return. The whole thing takes minutes. This is why the Mongol conquest killed on a scale argued about 8 centuries later. You'll see the number 40 million everywhere. Serious estimates run from 20 to 60 million across the full span of the conquest. Every one of them leaned on a medieval census, records historians don't trust. The precision is fake, the scale isn't, and it wasn't because the Mongols were bigger or stronger, it's because they fought like this. Now it's evening. The city ahead is walled, fortified, and already surrounded. Genghis Khan's opening move is almost always the same. Send an envy, offer terms, submit, and the city is absorbed in tax. Resist, and what happens next is designed to be described in detail by refugees to the next city down the road. Terror is a logistics strategy. Every town that opens its gates is a siege you don't have to fight. You're on the perimeter, riding the ring, cutting escape routes. The Mongols didn't invent siege warfare, but they perfected it. Chinese engineers came into the army out of the campaigns against the Jin, bringing traction trebuchets and gunpowder incendiaries. And local labor is conscripted to build and haul on site. The famous counterweight trebuchets built by Muslim engineers came much later, decades after this, under Kublai. Tonight you'll sleep in a light tent, one carried for every 10 riders. Your Arban again, the same 9 men. Here's the thing, you don't hate these people, you barely think about them. You were a herder before this. Your family moved animals across grasslands for generations. And this reads the same way, a problem, a direction, an order. The violence is a tool, not a passion. But let me show you what you actually carry, because it isn't a weapon. A file for your arrowheads, a needle and sinew thread, a cooking pot, 2 leather bottles, a coil of rope, an axe, a lasso, and a waterproof leather bag. The bag holds your food and your spare clothes. It also holds air. When the army reaches a river, and between here and Europe, there are a great many rivers. You stuff it, seal it, lash it into the saddle, hold on, and swim your horse across. No bridge, no boat, no delay. An army that needs bridges can be predicted. And trust me, you don't want that. The bag is the reason a Mongol force turns up on the wrong side of a river a week before anyone thought it was possible. That's the whole empire in one object, not a superweapon. Relentless self-sufficiency. And there's a second object. Thought it isn't yours, and it never will be. Sometime today, a rider passed you going the other way at a speed nobody else on the continent can match, carrying a tablet the size of his hand, wood, bronze, silver, or gold depending on his rank, inscribed with a formula invoking the power of eternal heaven. That's a pesa. You will never be issued one. They go to envoys, officials, protected merchants, and messengers. It entitles the bearer to demand food, fresh horses, shelter, and an escort from any station or settlement he reaches. Those stations are the Yam, 20 to 40 miles apart, each stocked with remounts, and a carrier riding hard puts 125 to 200 miles behind him in a day. In 1220, the network is still young. It runs across Mongolia and northern China, and it's Genghis' successor, Ogedei, who will build it across the empire. Once it's finished, news of Khan's death in Mongolia will reach Mongol armies in Central Europe in 4 to 6 weeks. The Mongol Empire wasn't only conquest, it was infrastructure. In the decades after these campaigns, the routes across Asia became passable in a way they hadn't been in a very long time, and ideas, technologies, and goods moved along them. The period historians call the Pax Mongolica, worth saying plainly, though it was paid for first. The cities burning in 1220 are the same cities these routes ran through. Some of them never came back. Still in the saddle, 6 days of hard riding, your legs have gone past pain into something that doesn't register anymore. You'll dismount properly when the campaign pauses or the column reaches camp, and that could be weeks. For now, the saddle is the world. The horse's heartbeat is your heartbeat. The wind is your ceiling. and your army will be remembered forever.